Hello dear students, this is Gilles Tellier for lecture number 5 of our lectures on the Victorian era. This lecture is due to be delivered on Monday, October the 5th. And it is nearly the end of our program on the 19th century, because next week you will have the last lecture on the British Empire, and then you will go on to the 20th and 21st century with our beloved colleagues. This lecture is once again important, and it is important for you that you should work on it as usual with the PowerPoint in front of you, the PowerPoint that is on Amethyst, and listening to the audio and of course taking notes. Please do that before you go to the tutorial. Remember, it's always very important that you should have all the elements to understand the tutorial. If you don't have the background, then you will be lost in oblivion, like some of my students I had this week. So please pay attention, be careful, and of course get some questions ready if anything is unclear. So slide number 1 is, as usual, the title of our program, so I go directly to slide number 2, which will give today's date and today's program. The date is 1872, and it's the Crystal Palace speech, which was delivered by Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli, and we'll come back, of course, on that speech and why it was an important landmark in Victorian era. The perspectives, as you can see, written on slide number 2, new parties, labour force, political history, class system, vote, political thought. So obviously, you know that we are going to deal with Victorian politics, and of course this is a key issue of the understanding of that period. So I'd like to go to slide number 3, which has the same title, some details. Conservative Prime Minister, PM means Prime Minister. Don't mistake that with MP, which means Member of Parliament. So of course Benjamin Disraeli was an MP, he was a Member of Parliament, but he was at the head of those MPs because he was Prime Minister. Not all the time, but he was there in office quite often. So the Crystal Palace speech, or political parties and the class system. Obviously, you see how important this lesson is when we mention the class system. We already saw that in the previous tutorials we had until today. 2 parts, modernity and politics, the new party system. So we'll put the emphasis on the fact that there is a renewal in the political life. We will see how and why. And the second part, also very important, trade unionism and the labour movement. Because what happened in the 19th century will change the face of politics in Britain in the 20th century. So I'd like to go on to my slide number 4, and you can see a long text. I'm not going to read it now, of course, because I'm just here to comment that PowerPoint. So you'll read it in detail. But you can see the picture of the person who delivered the speech is a conservative prime minister called Benjamin Disraeli. He was from Jewish origin, and he had to convert to Anglicanism in order to be prime minister. It would not have been possible not to have an Anglican prime minister. So his mandates are written under his photograph. He was prime minister in 1868, so not for a long time, but longer a few years later, from 1874 and 1880. And we will see that he had an arch enemy, I would say, an arch opponent, that is a main opponent, his best enemy, in the person of Mr. Gladstone. We'll come back on him. Now, what is interesting in the speech is that you have the conservative principles. That is one of the main parties that still exist today. You know, the Conservative Party. You know that the leader of the actual Prime Minister of Great Britain, Boris Johnson, is from the Conservative Party. Of course, we will see which are the other parties at the time, and if they survived until today. We know the Conservative Party did. Now, so the emphasis is put on the red parts of this speech, which gives you an idea of what are the main objectives at the time of the Conservative Party: to maintain the institutions of the country. You see, to maintain is a synonym for to conserve, hence the name conservative, to preserve if you prefer, to maintain the institutions of the country. Another element of those conservative principle is the ideas which presents the idea represented by the monarchy, the majesty of law, the administration of justice, the fountain of mercy and of honor. This is a bit outdated, of course. This wouldn't be used today as arguments of the credo of the Conservative Party, but in the 19th century it was predominant and it was important. And they're also very keen on the established church. Now, of course, you know what this is because you have carefully read and learnt the previous chapter on angels and apes. And you remember that the established church is the official church in England, nicknamed the Anglican Church, okay, and of which the leader is the monarch, okay. So in order to, at that time and still today, to have a position in life, you were well thought of to be able to be part of that church. Of course, as I said, Mr. Disraeli converted to Anglicanism in order to have a political life, or else he wouldn't have been able to have that political life. So please read the text carefully, try to understand it the best you can, because you have all the elements that are constituent of the Conservative Party under in the 19th century. And of course, you may ask any questions you want, either during your tutorial or by sending me a mail. So my first part, modernity and politics, the new party system. As usual, you remember that the first sub-part is always the background, you must know. It's always a reminder because, as you know, your program is inverted. That is, you will learn about 16th, 17th and 18th century next year. And of course it would be useful to know it now. So even if it doesn't seem logic to you, it's only because it's important and it's these are difficult parts, and it's better that you should be third-year students in order to study those periods. Anyway, here you will have a reminder of what you know and what you should know, or what you must know. And we will, in the second part, talk about the new party system, what was at stake, why was it new, what was changed, what was old, and the consequences it had. Slide number 6 is the background you must know. So it's old politics, of course. We're going to talk of before the new political system. How was the old political system? And the old political system was really very old and was shared by almost every human beings on earth. Slide number 7, you have a summary of what took place in England, but you can transport, or you can use that pattern for any countries in the world, Japan, for example, or China, or South America, Africa. It is the notion of the feudal system. The feudal system, the notion that there is a sovereign who gets the money from his people, but in order to do that, he is also compelled to protect them. So in Europe and in England in particular, you see the slide, you have a drawing on the right-hand side of your slide. At the top you can see the king and the queen. Then you can see the nobles under them, nobility, the aristocrats. Then you have the knights. Of course, knights and nobles are close together. The knights are often nobles, and nobles are knights. And then you have the peasants, you have the rest of the population. What is not really representative in this pattern is that the 90%, 90 or even 95% of the population was in the lowest rank, that is, they were peasants. Only an elite belonged to the class of the knights, the class of the nobles, and of course the king and queen were unique. So, but the three top ranking classes were a minority, and they stuck together. Sometimes they fought together. Just think about Shakespeare and all the historical plays where the War of the Roses, for example, between the Yorks and the Lancasters. We know that, of course, trying to get power has always been a military activity of nobility and knights. However, so this system had existed from a very, very, very long time. You can go back to the Celts, to the Vikings, and a particularly important example, which you have in a little drawing in the middle, which is in fact, some of you may know, a passage or an extract from an excerpt from the Tapisserie de Bayeux, which represents the first French king of England, William, known as the Conqueror, William I. And it's an important element, of course, because he turned all the Saxon population of England into peasants, because the lords became the Normans. You know, he was Duke of Normandy from Viking origin, but French. And this is why there's so much French in the English language, and particularly if you look at the coat of arms, les armoiries, if you go to Buckingham Palace, you will see them. They are beautiful, and they are written in French, which is quite surprising, because England and France have been arch enemies for so many years. And you know them, one of them is the Order of the Garter, Honni soit qui mal y pense, which means I curse the person who thinks bad or ill. And the other one is quite clear, also in French, Dieu est mon droit. Et it's et, okay, not is. So it means that what is most important at that time for the first French king is God and his right. So this is, of course, a very old system which evolved through time and which gave the modern system, even though it was adapted to be more democratic. This is why today, even though Britain still have a king and a queen, unlike France, who, as you know, is a republic and has therefore no kings and queens, despite the fact that there is a king, Britain is a democracy with a parliament, with elected people. This is what you have at the bottom with the different colors, green and red, the Houses of Parliament, divided into two parts, the House of Commons and the House of Lords. So you probably studied that in first year classes, so please just remember, I'm not going to devote too much time on that, but you know that these two houses are the ones that govern the country, the Prime Minister being an MP from the House of Commons. The House of Lords, of course, is an interesting thing to see, because in France we call it the Senate. We don't call it the House of Lords, because in France the Lords have lost all their power in 1789 with the French Revolution. It's the same in the United States. You have the Senate, you don't have the House of Lords, because the United States was not was never a kingdom, or only was a colony of the United Kingdom, but it never was when it became autonomous. It became also a sort of republic, I would say. Anyway, a democracy. So this system goes back in time for a long time, and we know that from the beginning of history, this elite class was unrestful, I would say. That is, the king used to have his barons around him. Barons, of course, is a title, but it's also a generic word to say the nobles, nobility. That is, the companions of the kings are with him. But of course, sometimes they are against him, as I took the example of the Yorks and the Lancasters. This, of course, is a very important thing. Kings have used the barons as a council. A council, that is, to ask advice. Should we go to war? Should we not go to war? Should we be friends with these people or not? So the barons have always been the counselors of the king, and they were at the heart of what is called the House of Lords. That is, it became an habit to have the Lords together, to go together in order to be able to talk to the king and to advise him. It's only little by little, when particularly nobility did not care anymore to go to London to go to that House of Lords, that they sent some of their servants. And these servants were more and more numerous to go to London. And little by little they were received, of course, in Parliament, but they could not go in the House of Lords. They represented the Lords, but they were not the Lords. So a house was created for them, and it was called the House of Commons, commoners, simple people. And this is how the two houses came to exist. I'm not going to do the whole history of Parliament. It's a very interesting history. But you should bear in mind that there will be an evolution, and particularly an evolution which will lead the House of Commons to take power over the House of Lords, particularly after the Glorious Revolution of 1688. And this is why later the Prime Minister, we will see that, will sit in the House of Commons and not in the House of Lords anymore. So gradually you can see that commoners took power over the Lords, and it was a slow process but a long one. And of course now today you know that the House of Lords have little power except to counterbalance the power of the House of Commons and make sure that democracy is preserved. An interesting origin of the word parliament, well, it comes from the French parlementer, because of William the Conqueror, who was a French king, Guillaume le Conquérant. So this is an important also element of the understanding of this system. So you see the feudal system that was embodied by the House of Lords gradually led to democracy with the emergence of the House of Commons. Let's go on now to slide number 8. It's monarchs versus parliament. The opposition between parliament and the monarchy has always existed. As we saw, there was already sometimes complications within the House of Lords, because of course some of the lords wanted to be king. Just think about, it's not England but it's Scotland. Think about Macbeth, the play by Shakespeare, where the wife of the Thane of Cawdor kills the King of Scotland so that her husband could become King of Scotland. So it's something that you know of and has been present in many societies. So dissensions between House of Lords and the monarch has always existed. But then when the House of Commons arrived, there were also problems with the commoners, of course, who were the ones who they represented the interests. At the beginning, they represented the interests of the lords, but finally, we saw that they represented the interest of the whole population. And therefore, it was an opposition sometimes between the king, who used to be, remember, by divine right, which means that God had, well, that's what they thought, of course, that God had decided that such person would be king. So the idea would be that you cannot touch a king, because if you touch a king, you are against God. At that time, religion, as you know, was very important, and therefore it was a blasphemy to attack the king, because then you would be attacking God. This is why a dynasty of kings that succeeded the Tudors, you remember the Tudors, we mentioned them particularly with the Protestant Reformation. The most famous one was Henry VIII, you remember, the one who had 6 wives, had 2 of them beheaded, decapitated. Then there was his son, Edward VI, and then his daughter, Mary Tudor, Bloody Mary, because she killed a lot of Protestants, and finally Queen Elizabeth I. Because she died without any children, it was a Stuart king from Scotland, James VI of Scotland, who became James I of England. And then there was a succession of Stuart kings. And some of them were not very keen on the parliament, because they considered that they were by divine right, and therefore they didn't need parliament to rule and govern the country. So they did not ask parliament for anything, and they didn't even summon, I mean to gather, to ask the parliament to be in session. They did not summon the parliament for more than a decade, more than 10 years, which is a lot. Normally parliaments work every day of the year. So 10 years without a parliament was a bit long. And so little by little there was a rebellion. And one of the rebellion against the Stuart kings was led by the man with the armor that you see at the bottom next to the battle that is represented in the middle of slide number 8. That is Oliver Cromwell. It was the only time that Britain became a republic. That is, monarchy was stopped, the king was beheaded, and Parliament ruled the country. So it became, like in France, a republic. Like today's France, of course, not at the time. It did not last long, and the king came back because British people thought that having a king was a guarantee of stability. But the king that came after the Great Revolution of 1688 was a king that was asked to come by Parliament. So the king had not the same power as the Stuart kings, and this is really the very important date, 1688, the date when when Parliament won the battle against the monarchy. Because after 1688, no king will ever have any real power over Parliament. And little by little, the king and queens of England will have less and less power. And as you know today, the Queen of England cannot rule the country. It's only a representative of the guarantee of the stability of the country. But she makes a speech and she meets the prime minister, but she cannot say what to do. We know that, for example, she said nothing about the Brexit except one day that she was dressed in blue, and people thought that maybe it was a way to show she was attached to Europe. But that's the only expression, and we're not sure, it's just an hypothesis. So the Great Revolution of 1688, you will study next year in detail, was an important, a very important landmark for the evolution of monarch versus parliament relations. I'd like to go on to my next slide, which is slide number 9, and to go into the details of what the political parties were at the time. And of course, we will see also that it had a consequence on the notion of the class system. These elements of are not, well, what you have on the slide with the name, as you can see with the chart on the right hand side, with Whigs and Tories, you have in fact something that is not real political parties. They're more, I would say, groups of influence, on tendency. That is, well, people that oppose each other. Wigs, because you know what a wig is false hair that you put on your head, especially when you're bald today and you want to pretend that you have hair. At the time it was a fashion, you know that wigs were very big and curly and particularly for men. And so the Whigs was one group of influence. The other were known as the Tories. Their other name, you know it perfectly well because we have mentioned it already, are the Conservatives. And still today, the Conservatives can be called the Tory Party, for example. So the name has been kept. So in a way, we can say that the Tories are the ancestors of the Conservative Party. There is a continuity between the Tories and the Conservatives till today. The Whigs is a bit different. In the 19th century, they will be called the Liberals, and we will have a lot of details about that change. The Liberals, who still exist today, but they are not the main political party, the main opposition party to Boris Johnson's Conservative Party, but I should say the third, maybe, but I'm not specialist of the 20th century, so you'll see that with Mr. Graves and Madame André. Because there's a third party will emerge. That's what we're going to see in a few minutes. A third party, which is now really the opposition party, which is the Labour Party, which did not exist at that time. So the Whigs and Tories, you can see, will continue in time and will change. And of course, they will be the new parties. Because they will not be groups of influence anymore, but real parties. So what are their specificity, I would say, at the time, of course, because it has changed since then. The Whigs were against absolute monarchy. They were the ones who really fought against the Stuart kings. You know, when they were in Parliament, they really fought against the Stuart kings, who considered themselves by divine right. And they were the one who decided to behead the Stuart king. So they're against absolute monarchy, not against monarchy, but absolute monarchy. You got it. It's the monarchy by divine right. They opposed the Stuart kings, and they are composed of aristocrats and dissenters. So if you remember what we said about religion, you remember that there are Anglicans, Protestant Anglicans, which are a majority in England because it's the established church, it's the official church. So a great percentage of the population is Anglican. But if you do remember, there are Protestants that were considered extremists by Queen Elizabeth, and she said, you must conform to the Church of England. That is, you must join the Anglican Church. You are Protestants, so it's easier for you to join a Protestant church than for the Catholics, for example, to join a Protestant church. but I don't want you to be opposed to me, said Queen Elizabeth. And so some of the Calvinists stayed in England, but did not join the Church of England because they thought they were really different from the Anglicans. And so they became dissenters because they did not obey the Queen. They also were called non-conformists. Non-conformist because they didn't conform to the Church of England, the Anglican Church, the established church. Some others, it was too much for them. They didn't want to stay in a country where they had been persecuted by Mary Tudor, remember Bloody Mary, and by Queen Elizabeth. She did not persecute them, but she could put them in prison if they tried to take power, for example. So they left, and you know now, you remember what we said. They were called also the Puritans. These Calvinist dissenters, non-conformist people, were also called by others, not by themselves, as Puritans, because they wanted to come back to the purity of Protestantism and the Bible. And so they left, they took the Mayflower and other ships, and they went to the United States of America, and they became the WASP, the White Anglo-Saxon Protestants. So the Whigs are composed of these Calvinists, and we will see that these Calvinists, these dissenters, these nonconformists, also represented the middle class that emerged in the 19th century, 18th century, and 19th century Britain, the industrialists and the merchants. We're going to come back on that. This is a very, very important issue. And they are known also as the Country Party, because they represent the people of Britain. On the other side of the column, we have the Tories, so who will become the Conservatives. At the beginning, they were for absolute monarchy, so you can imagine they defended the Stuart kings. This is why, if you look at the end of the column, you will see they were known as the Court Party, by opposition to the Whigs, who were the Country Party. They were the Court Party. They were the party of the Stuart kings. Then, and you can see the then, which is very important in red, because it means there was a change. Of course, the reason being that the Stuart kings were eliminated from the kingdom, and therefore the Tories had to change their perspectives. So then they accepted the new monarchs, and therefore the new system, which is still today the system in England, which is a parliamentary monarchy. That is a parliament that rules, but with a king and a queen. We don't have that in France. They don't have it in America. It's only Britain that has this system. Others have, like Spain, for example. Spain has a parliamentary monarchy, of course. The Tories became the champion of the new monarchy and defended landed interests. Now that's very interesting also, because landed interests represent the people who own the land. Now, who own the land? The country squire, which means a noble who has land. Of course, they have the kings and the barons had lands, and they kept it. And small gentry, also small gentry, which means it's not the high aristocrats, but it's a small gentry. Gentlemen, gentry is gentlemen. Okay, if you remember Jane Austen, Pride and Prejudice, you remember that Lizzie Bennet is the daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Bennet, and Mr. Bennet is a small gentry gentleman. He has difficulties with money, he has not a lot of land, and the catastrophe for him, he hasn't got a son. So all the story, and you know Jane Austen is very good at that, is for the parents to get their daughters married, well married, so that there will be no problems afterwards. So small gentry, Mr. Bennet is part of that small gentry. And the old aristocracy, I'm sorry, there is a mistake, I didn't see that, and the Anglican Church. So you can see that there are differences already, depending who is siding with. In terms of religion, we see that the Whigs are more Protestants but non-dissenters and non-conformists, while the Tories are more for the Anglican Church, the established church. And it's called the Court Party. You have also on the left-hand side of this slide a pattern of what the class system became in the 19th century. I put it there because you needed to have it somewhere. But we're going to explain the middle class, which did not exist before. But now you see there are three classes in the 19th century. Not really at the beginning. It's really at the end that this class system will emerge. You have details on who belongs to that class, but we'll come back on that again in a few seconds. So let's go on to slide number 10 and this notion of the new party system. Slide 11 and 12 are something that I'm not going to comment for long. It's just I put some highlights on some people that will be of interest to us, particularly in the as far as prime ministers are concerned, because as you can see, prime ministers, there is alternative. If you look in the first slide, that is in slide number 11, you can see on the left-hand side a list, and you can see the same name in blue, Robert Peel. Now, Robert Peel is someone we're going to talk about, but you can see he was a prime minister from 1834 to 1835. He was a Tory, and the king that ruled at that time was William IV, okay, who was an uncle to Queen Victoria. Then he lost the elections, and William Lamb became prime minister. Of course, he was a Whig, because a Tory lost the election, it was a Whig. Robert Peel, then I don't know why I put conservative, it's a Tory again, but it's the same. He became in power again, and then it was a Whig. So you see there's a regular change at that time between Whigs and Tories regularly, but of course it's under the surveillance, I would say, of kings and queens. And of course in 1837 you know that Queen Victoria became Queen of England. So this chart, of course, is not to be known by heart, but if you are a bit lost, who is Prime Minister, who is King or Queen of England at that time, you can look at these two slides. The second one, slide number 12, you see more blue names as far as Prime Ministers are concerned, because I'm going to talk a lot about them under Victoria. So you have several pictures of Victoria at different ages of her life. You know she had the second longest reign of a British monarch before Queen Elizabeth I, but after Queen Elizabeth II, who beat the record 2 years ago, I think. She became the longest reigning monarch of the United Kingdom. And we find in the middle, in 1868, our Benjamin Disraeli, you remember, as a conservative. Then Gladstone, I mentioned him to you, liberal, and then Disraeli again, and then Gladstone again, and then Salisbury, and then Gladstone, Salisbury, Gladstone, Rosebery, Salisbury. Rosebery, you may have remembered him because you had a text by him in last week's tutorial on Angel and Apes. He was the one who talked about the imperial race. So this is the one, Lord Rosebery. And so these names are interesting and important to remember. If you can work on that, you might benefit from knowing who is who and what they do. And more particularly, one important element is what is their party. This is the topic, our topic today, of course. So once again, this is not to learn by heart, but you should know a few things about them, of course. Slide number 13, once again, is another chart dealing with the economy. The economy at the heart of politics. Why? Because the economy becomes more and more important. It has always been important, of course, as far as any country is concerned. You know that trade is one of the oldest activities humans have ever developed on our planet. You know that prehistoric man would trade, they would swap things, exchange things, and this was the beginning of commerce. And you know that many human achievements are linked to commerce and trade, because people have to travel in order to commerce and trade, and great discoveries were done because of that, particularly the great expeditions were linked to commerce. So British politics is not that different from what I've just said, and therefore the economy once again shaped the political life of Great Britain. So little by little in the 19th century, as I said, the former 18th century groups of influence, lobbies maybe we could call it, but it was big lobby, okay, not small lobbies, big lobbies. But these groups of influence, such as the Whigs and the Tories, little by little turned into professional political parties, because they needed to be structured. Amateurism was not possible anymore if they wanted to win elections. So this is why I put an equal between Whigs and Liberals and Tories and Conservatives, because the Liberals and the Conservatives are the names they will become known in the 19th century, and of course still today you talk about Liberals and Conservatives. Tories and Whigs is just a nickname to remember where they came from, but it's not their official name anymore. What is the economic project behind those two parties? Well, you can see they oppose each other. The first thing is for Whigs is, of course, because of their name, is they are for liberalism. Liberalism, that is free trade, and as you can see in French, laissez-faire. You have to pronounce it in English because that's how the English pronounce it. The laissez-faire policy is something that is very new at the time. It's linked to the Industrial Revolution, of course, and it's linked to someone that you have heard of, and we're going to talk about him, which is a Scottish economist named Adam Smith. We'll come back on him. So liberalism, free trade, laissez-faire policy. Laissez-faire could be summed up by the idea of no intervention of the state in the economy. I repeat, no intervention of the state in the economy. This is opposed to the Tories, who are for protectionism. Another word, a synonym for protectionism, is mercantilism. Protectionism, you heard about it because not a long time ago and still today, when I'm talking, you know that, for example, President Trump of the United States of America has put on some protectionist laws, particularly against China, but also against Europe. So this economic system is still present. Of course, it's not a total protectionist system. The liberal system still prevails in America, in the United States, but there are elements of protectionism. So today we have a sort of mix between the two. If I come back to the Whigs, I have this definition I told you: non-intervention of the government in the economy, and something that is economically very important. They want the repealing of the Corn Laws. What are the Corn Laws? The Corn Laws are laws that were voted in 1815 at the end of the Napoleonic Wars. For which reason? Well, simply because there was a recession at the time. Why was there a recession? Because it was the end of the Continental Wars. The Continental Wars, also called the Napoleonic Wars, are the wars that opposed Europe, with Britain as the leader of this coalition, against the formidable army of Napoleon, who invaded nearly the whole of Europe. When the Battle of Waterloo was fought in 1815, Napoleon was defeated and was definitely defeated, so the war was over. Britain was a victor, but Britain had to pay for this victory economically because the British government, stopped all the contracts with the British companies who supplied the army, the British army, with horses, ships, weapons, cannons, uniforms, food, etc. So it was a good bargain for the companies because they were paid by the government, they were paid by the army. But when the war stopped, of course, the government stopped all the contracts. And a lot of people became unemployed from those companies because the job was scarce and there was no production. Another drawback is that all the soldiers who came back from the continent were disbanded. They were not professional soldiers, and so they had to come back to civilian life. All these people arrived on the market, and there was unemployment, high rate of unemployment. And when there is unemployment, a lot of people cannot buy anything, and so there is a recession, and the economy was going down. So in order to protect the British economy, the Tory party, the Conservatives, decided to put some protectionist laws, and particularly on corn. But corn, of course, we saw that with the Hungry Forties, led to famine also, along with bad harvests. So the fight was that the liberals wanted the abolition of the corn laws, the repealing, which is the official term for law. In French, it would be l'abrogation des lois, abroger une loi. So the repealing of the corn laws, which took place in 1846. But between 1815 and 1846, it was really the fight of the liberals against the Tories to repeal the corn laws. The following element is support of manufacturers and traders. Manufacturers, traders, industrialists are part of the middle class. They are the ones who emerged from the Industrial Revolution, and they're called the middle class because they didn't exist before. Remember, before the feudal system, you had the upper classes, including the king, queen, nobles, and knights. The rest of the population, 95%, were peasants, and they were part of the lower class. So you had the upper class and lower class. Only two classes in the feudal system. Now, because of the Industrial Revolution, there is a new class that emerges. It's called the middle class because it's put in between the upper class and the lower class. And it becomes known as the middle class, or sometimes with the French name of bourgeoisie. And on the other side, the Tories still support the aristocratic landed gentry. So you can see here again on the economy there is an opposition. The Tories, the Conservatives, are going to support the upper class, but because they have land, and so they support the agricultural system, they support the corn laws, and they support protectionism. On the other hand, the Whigs support the middle class and as a consequence the working class or lower class, but now it's better known as the working class, and they protect manufacturers, so the selling of goods, and of course to trade and to sell goods you need a free market, hence liberalism. You cannot have protectionism. So you see, two economic oppositions are quite clear here. Another element that opposes the two parties, the franchise. Remember, you have studied that with Mr. Calvini-Lefebvre. You have studied the right to vote. That's called the franchise. That is, who can vote and who cannot. For liberals, the more people vote, the more middle class and working class people will be able to vote, and therefore will counteract the power of the upper class conservatives. And of course, the conservatives on the other side are against the franchise to all, restricting it to upper class Tory conservative voters. Of course, they don't want middle class, even though even though they are getting power with the economy, they have more and more money. but still they don't want to share it. And of course they don't want the working class to have it. For them it's not yet communism, but it's the same pattern. Back to the Whigs, support the Chartist movement, one man, one vote. So the Chartist movement is about the franchise. It's a direct consequence. You have some, there is a poster, a Chartist demonstration, and there's a cartoon about it, dealing with the Chartist movement. And of course, so the one man, one vote, you can understand that the Tories were against that. The Conservatives were against the right to vote for everybody. Of course, we do understand also the Liberals would have a lot of power if they had everybody who could vote for them, of course, because they represented middle class and were supported by the working class people. So working class people will support liberalism and the Liberal Party, but will then turn its own labor forces, because of course we will see that the Liberal Party will favor more the middle class who has the money than the working class, and particularly when there'll be dissensions between the boss and his employees. The boss would be from the middle class and the employees from the working class. So to be in the same party would be difficult, because of course there will be oppositions, there will be strikes, there will be fightings, and of course we know that the same happened in France with, and we know that the stories by Zola with Germinal, for example, and the opposition of working class people to the middle class bosses. And finally, for the Conservatives, little by little, the Conservative Party will adopt free trade attitudes, such as the Peelites, who even joined the Liberal Party. Why? Because it was really nearly impossible to protect free trade. You know, is what we have today everywhere in the world. Mind you, it's not necessarily the best thing that happened to us. We can discuss, of course, that which is not the object, but of course we can criticize the capitalist system, because we see what is happening to our planet, and there are dangers coming about because of that. But at that time, of course, it was just that it was just the beginning of capitalism. It really happened in Britain, and it really did happen because of the Industrial Revolution. So this was new, and this is why it's not surprising that the Conservative Party decided one day to change its attitude toward the economy. So it's a bit complex, but you see this chart is very important. You should know everything about it, at least understand how it works, because in any text that you will have, you'll have to see whether you are dealing with a liberal person or a conservative person, and of course you will have all this background to the mentality of the person. I'm going now to my next slide, number 15, and we have here something that is interesting to analyze, the story of Sir Robert Peel. Sir Robert Peel is famous for one very anecdote which is quite interesting, is that if you go to England you can see a policeman or a policewoman, and you know they are nicknamed Bobbies. Well, they are nicknamed Bobbies because of Sir Robert Peel. Robert, the nickname of Robert is Bobby, like Bobby Kennedy. In fact, he was Robert Kennedy. Bobbies because he invented the modern police when he was Prime Minister. And mind you, if you are Netflix fans, and there is a very nice series at the moment. I'm watching it, so I can testify. It's called The Frankenstein Chronicles. It's a very nice way, a faithful way to represent the Victorian era. And you have a character who is Sir Robert Peel in the story. So just for those who are Netflix fans, the Frankenstein Chronicles. So he's a conservative leader, but as we saw, he will change and stop, in fact, the Corn Laws. He will repeal the Corn Laws, which is funny because you remember, if you look at the charts that I showed you a few minutes ago, you saw that how should I put it? liberals wanted to fight the Corn Laws, not the conservatives. And yet it is a conservative leader who destroyed or repealed the Corn Laws. So this is one of the ideas that is a bit strange, but in fact it means that people are realizing that a free market is more important than a protected market. So this is why this conversion of Sir Robert Peel to that new economic system. However, it provoked a schism, a separation, a gap, and the Peelites, as they were known, became more liberals, and some of them joined the liberals in 1859 because, in fact, they had the same ideas, and some other more conservatives, such as Benjamin Disraeli, kept their ideology, I would say, and stayed within the Conservative Party. At the top you see a blue box, of course, just to remind you that we saw recently, one of the classes of Mr. Calvin-Lefebvre about the Great Famine, and of course the protectionist laws were responsible for the Great Famine, partly, along with bad harvests. Because you remember, if you protect the price of corn, then inside the United Kingdom, farmers can fix the price, and they fix a high price for corn, which is at the root of food, the basic food that is bread. And of course, if prices are high, food goes up, the cost of living goes up, and people start starving. So this is why he also had, Sir Robert Peel had to stop the Corn Laws. I just realized that I've skipped one slide, I'm sorry, but it doesn't really matter. I'm just going back just before, because in fact the slide on Sir Robert Peel is in my part on the Conservative Party. And so, just to come back, sorry, with just a little bit, you can see Benjamin Disraeli in front of Queen Victoria. So the conservative values are, just to remind you, defense of the crown, the church, and the constitution. Preservation of the prerogatives of the crown, upholding the independence of the House of Lords, continuation of the union of church and state. So you see, these are really the main elements that, for example, Benjamin Disraeli supported. We saw it in his speech at the beginning of this PowerPoint, speech that you have to read for next time. And he supported such a system, and he promoted something which was called his popular conservative, of course, because he didn't want it to appear as the party of the elite, but wanted also to have middle-class people and even working-class people with him. Of course, it was it did enable him to win the election in 1864. But these differences still exist between the two, of course. They took the name of the Conservatives in the 1830s, as I said, even though the name is still used today. And once again, the party became the champion, I forgot the P, sorry, champion of the Church of England, and therefore it rejected the Catholic Emancipation Act of 1830, which would have allowed the Catholics to have civil servants' position. They were forbidden, and since Elizabeth I, remember, Elizabeth I considered Catholics as extremists and Calvinists also as extremists, and so they were not allowed to have any position. So, just to keep the order clear, slide number 15 now, Sir Robert Peel, Conservative leader, but I've just explained it, so I'm not going to stop on that, and I'm going to go now to the Liberal Party. The Liberal Party were made of values that were called Puritan, because they were based on the Protestant ethic of loving God through hard and honest work and personal responsibility. Okay, In the 20s, it left this Protestant origin aside, but of course, everything in the Liberal Party was embedded in the Protestant Calvinist, to be precise, ethic. Of course, now you know there are differences between Lutherans, Anglicans, and Calvinists. I had a question by Yusra that I answered. I hope you all got my answer. It's a difficult, of course, question that Yusra asked me, which was to know all the differences. One of the differences here, the Calvinists had this Protestant ethic that with hard work, you honor God. And of course, you understand that free enterprise was behind, capitalism was behind, and the Industrial Revolution was behind. So in fact, the middle class, the Industrial Revolution, and capitalism are a product of this non-conformist dissenters who were not allowed, as you remember from Elizabeth I, allowed to be civil servants. So they didn't do any politics, but they worked hard, and therefore they became successful entrepreneurs. And this is why this ethic was at the heart of the Liberal Party. Officially, the Liberal Party was founded in 1859, okay, and as I said, with the Whig people, and of course the Peelites, who were former conservatives who joined the Liberals. It happened also that Liberals, we will see, joined the Conservative later for other reasons. The name changed in 1988, so recently, a few years ago, as the Liberal Democrats that are still present today in British political life. Middle class accessed the franchise in 1832. If you do remember your franchise class by Mr. Calvin Lefebvre, there were three main ones: 1832, 1867, and 1884. The middle class accessed the franchise in 1832. More middle class people, let's say the lower middle class people, accessed it in 1867, and in 1884 it's the working class that accessed the right to vote. Remember that women, it will only be in 1918. It's late compared to men, but it's earlier than French women who had the right to vote only in 1945. 1868, election of William Gladstone, end of the dominance of the Whig aristocratic oligarchy. That is now, it's not the upper classes that are still present in the Whig party, but more common people, such as Mr. Gladstone, and this is why he turned it into a modern party and not a group of influence. I'd like to go on now to another slide and to come back on this notion of Protestant dissenters, the middle class values that are at the heart of three things, as I said: the Industrial Revolution, capitalism, and the middle class. The three things all come from these Protestant dissenters or non-conformists. I explained to you everything, so just listen back to this audio and you will have all the details. A good example was presented by Samuel Smiles. We often use text by this man with a white beard, and he wrote a book called Self-Help. It was called in 1859, the same year as Darwin's theories or origin of species. It was called the Bible of Mid-Victorian Liberalism. And the idea is to be self-efficient, not to rely on government's help. And this is what he explained in his book, that everybody should work hard to become successful men. And of course, you know an expression that is more often used with Americans, but in fact it came from Samuel Smiles, which is the self-made man. You know this expression, the self-made man. That is, you do not have to count on on governmental help. You need to be a successful person by yourself because you work hard, honestly, of course. The idea is to work honestly. A member of a mafia is not part of that ethic, Protestant ethic. But if you work hard and you become a successful person, you start from nothing and you climb the different the ladder, the social ladder, then it means you are a good Protestant, a good Christian, and you are a successful man. And then you can help other people, such as your workers, for example. This is why you have some tycoons, you know, important people who were all Protestants. In Germany, the Krupps; in France, Peugeot; and in England, Cadbury, you know, the famous chocolate. And they all had a patriarchal way to deal with their employees, but which was positive for the employees because they gave them pensions, they gave them hospital, access to education, they gave them houses. So it's very patriarchal, but at the same time, I would have preferred to be one of the employees of these people rather than be an employee in Germinal, for example, having to strike and be ejected if I'm ill, or any other aspects, negative aspects of the Industrial Revolution. To come back to my slide, I'm just like to focus on the qualities of the self-made man, according to Samuel Smile, which, if you look at it, are quite positive things, and of course that you can use even if you're not a Protestant. If you want to be a successful person, you need to have common sense, okay? Not to do stupid things. Perseverance, okay? Not to give up too early. Altruism, being able to help others. A taste for saving, of course. If you spend all your money, you will not go too far in life. Frugality, same thing, not to eat too much, for example, and not to spend too much money again. Order, this is why the Victorians were seen as really hating chaos and preferring order. This is why, you know, the story of Jack the Ripper was a drawback for Victorians, because Jack the Ripper embodied chaos while they wanted order. And punctuality, of course. If you have a boss, you better be punctual if you want to keep your job. So these are the key elements. This slide really is very important because it helps you to understand the emergence of this middle class through work, through hard work, the emergence of the Industrial Revolution, along with inventions, of course, but they took the opportunity of the inventions in order to become successful people, rich people. And so Industrial Revolution, capitalism, really, it's the time when capitalism developed, self-made man. And of course, this is why they were grouped into that middle class, because they were not upper class people. They were richer than the working class people, even though we could say they were working class people. Of course, a boss still works, okay, by opposition to an aristocrat who doesn't do anything. To continue on the Liberal Party, you will have a look at John Stuart Mill's philosophy of political and economic organization. He was a liberal philosopher, so you see, economy and philosophy could go together, and an economist, of course. And of course, all you will read about him is that he really fought conservative ideas. He was really in favor of the laissez-faire policy, that is, no intervention of the state in the economy, and he really thought that, just like Samuel Smiles, the individual was at the heart of society. That is, the individual can become successful, and if he is successful, he can help the others. This is the ideal of this middle-class Victorian Protestant people. Individualism, self-respect, self-reliance are all the key words that John Stuart Mill promoted at that time. My following slide is interesting. It's all of them are interesting, of course. I'm sorry. I just want to put the emphasis on the LibLab, Liberal Labour Members of Parliament. Who are these people? Where you understand that the Liberal Party really represented the middle class and the working class. Why? Because you remember, they had a common interest. They wanted the repealing of the Corn Laws. Why were they against the Corn Laws? Well, you remember, because the bosses, the tycoons, the manufacturers, the traders, the merchants, they all wanted to be able to trade freely their goods. So they were against the Corn Laws. And their employees were against the Corn Laws also. Their workers, their factory workers. Because, of course, if the boss becomes rich, the factory is going to hire people. And so it's good for unemployed people. But also because you remember that the price of life was very high because of protectionism. The price of bread was very expensive and there was famine. So working class people were also against the Corn Laws. So there was a common fight between the bosses and the employees inside the Liberal Party against the Conservative Party, against the protectionist laws. So of course, some labor workers were able to be elected as liberal workers. You remember the Labour Party did not exist yet. And so these liberal Labour members of parliament were very important. There were 13 of them in the first elections in 1884. Working class Liberal Party candidates were elected. And this is a very important landmark because now you understand there are working class people in parliament, not just upper class people or middle class people since 1832, but now there are working class people. And of course, when they will realize very quickly that the Liberal Party, when there will be an opposition between the bosses from the middle class Liberal Party and from the workers and against the workers from the working class, but also in the Liberal Party, when there will be an opposition inside the Liberal Party, the Liberal Party will side with the bosses, of course, with the bosses and with the middle class, because they have the money. That's logic. It's not moral, but it's logic. So they will little by little understand that they have to go away from these this Liberal Party, and these Lib-Lab members of parliament will constitute the basis of the foundation of the Liberal Party. I'll come back to that in a few minutes. But those Lib-Labs will be very important for the Labour movement. Very quickly, because it's not that important, but there is a slide, number 20, on Gladstone's Irish Home Rule split, which is interesting for us. The idea that William Gladstone was for the autonomy of Ireland. Ireland was considered itself as a colony of Britain and not as a partner, and therefore they wanted autonomy. And there were home rule bills, but they were all defeated. And it's finally in 1922 that Ireland will take up arms and leave the United Kingdom to become independent. You know the consequences, that a little bit of Ireland remained within the United Kingdom, it's Ulster, and you know it's still today, particularly with the Brexit, a bone of contention between Europe, Southern Ireland or Eyre, or the Republic of Ireland, and Ulster and the rest of the United Kingdom. Now, why should I mention this episode? Because, in fact, it provoked a separation. When Gladstone wanted to promote the Home Rule Bill, some liberals rejected the Home Rule Bill, and therefore they joined the Conservative Party. So they were called the Liberal Unionists, who wanted to stay in the Union of the United Kingdom. And so there was another split, and this time it was on the other way around, from the Liberal Party towards the Conservative Party. Very quickly also, not to be too late, because I just have 2 hours, the idea that it is in the 18th century that out of the cabinet, which is the name of the government, the cabinet, where there were elite members of parliament who could trade and could work more precisely on the economy, war, taxes, justice, and all that. That this cabinet of super members of parliament, if you want, really became the government. And it's at that time that in the 18th century, they decided there would be they will have a leader, and this leader became the Prime minister. It used to be called the chief minister, but now it's the prime minister. You know that in Scotland it's called the first minister. But anyway, prime minister appeared in the 18th century, so it's quite a recent sort of invention. The first one was Sir Robert Walpole, so he was an aristocrat, but he understood that the Commons were so powerful now because of elections, and we will see, of course, with the right to vote, the Commons became more and more important in the 19th century, that he understood the true power was in the House of Commons and not anymore in the House of Lords. And so he decided to sit in the House of Commons, and this is where the Prime Minister still is today. If you see Parliament in Britain and you see the Prime Minister talking to the opposition, well, it's in the House of Commons. This is thanks to an aristocrat who was a clever man and could see the evolution of society. Slide 22. This is well, the evolution of in the 19th century. Just to remind you that there was a regular shift from Whigs to Tories, Tories to Whigs, Whigs to Tories. It was really there was not real stability. Sometimes prime minister just stayed for 1 year, and then there were elections again. There were riots, and so it was not. It became professional little by little. But it was not as calm, I would say, if I may say so, because with the Brexit we saw that there was not that it was not that calm. But there is more stability today than there used to be in the 19th century. So you will read this passage and you will have all the details. I'd like to go now to slide 23, and that is my second part. Trade unionism and the labor movement. Trade unionism, you know, it's the equivalent of, it's the translation of les syndicats. And so you can understand that we are talking about the labor movement, and therefore the third class that is present in the British society at that time, which is the working class. It used to be called the lower class, but of course it's a bit pejorative, so people now call it the working class, which is not exactly a proper nomination, as I said, because the middle class people are also working class people. They work. But of course, working class people meaning more peasants and workers in factories rather than bosses or bankers who are from the middle class. The background you must know, we will see that in 2a, then we will see trade unions, and 2c will be an example of the mining industry. And we'll finally, it should be 2D, sorry, A, B, C, D. I forgot the D, I don't know why. The D is about the Labour Party, because it only emerged at the end of the 19th century, so really at the end of our program. The real official foundation of the modern Labour Party is 1906. So you see, it's after the death of Queen Victoria in 1901, and therefore it is not our program. It's our colleagues' program. So I'm not we won't go too far into that. So slide 24, the background you must know. Slide 25. From lower class to working class. So I told you about the expression. Before that, the population was very much repressed. There was the Combination Act of 1799 and 1800, which prosecuted people for being trade unions or for organizing strikes, for example. This was really forbidden, and therefore you could go into prison. There was even a law in 1797 called the Mutiny Act, and the Mutiny Act was very, very strongly punished. For example, some people could be sent into the colonies, such as in Australia. You remember Australia used to be a prison, an open-air prison, but you could seldom come back from Australia when you were sent there. And just because you belonged to a trade union and you were caught striking, you could be sent to Australia, never to come back to England. So punishment were very, very harsh. So the history of trade unions in Britain is really a very strong and difficult story that unfolded uh, uh, um, from the 18th century until the 19th century and 20th century, and still continues today, of course. There used to be some forms of unions before. There were more called guilds, you know, the guilds of certain trades, in order to protect each other. But it really became a political thing, really, with the Industrial Revolution. So one of the first big trade unions that was created was in the woolen industry, wool, la laine, of course in textile, as you can see on the picture in the middle. The textile industry became very important. Machine spinnery in the industrial Lancashire organized in union in the 1790s. And there were trade unions, meaning that each trade had its own union. As I said, for example, the woolen industry or the textile trade unions was different from the brickmakers or the shipbuilders unions. And of course, they were less powerful because they just represented one trade and not all the trades. Of course, today we see some of them are still in the same pattern. We have the trade unions who can block the country. But generally speaking, the trade unions include all trades, and this is a major difference. The first trade union just had 500 members, so it's a very small one. And of course, they were meant to fight against the boss, not against the government. For example, with 500 members, you cannot do a lot of things. You can only do that on a local basis. And there was another element called the friendly societies, and I'll come back on the friendly societies because they were not trade unions, but sometimes to see the difference between a friendly society and a trade union was difficult. A friendly society was more of a social help. Okay, if someone was ill, the money could be collected in the friendly society and given to the person until the person found its job again. Because if you didn't work, you didn't get any money. And of course, there were terrible things such as accidents. If your arm was cut and you couldn't work anymore, then you had to be helped by the friendly societies. The friendly society spirit is that of the guilds, les guildes, from before, dating from the Middle Ages, where it was there to help each other inside the same trade. So this is how the lower class became the working class, because of the trade unions, which started to organize people and of course tell people they could defend their rights against bosses. Of course, being in the Liberal Party was a way to fight for that. The Chartist movement also was a very important working class movement, because working class people wanted the right to vote. As I said, they will only get it in 1884. But it started very early in the 19th century. And of course, a lot of people became professional trade unionists, and so the working class people developed what is called a working class consciousness. The idea that they are not to be serfs. You remember, nearly slaves from the Middle Ages. They had to obey the boss. Now they can, because they are not numerous, maybe they have a role to play. And that's what the trade unions are after. The biggest trade union possible. Slide number 26, it's about working class children at work. Now, in the 19th century, even if we see the Victorian era with this middle class values as a very Puritan and somewhat a very difficult society, it's also a very positive society because of this Protestant ethic, which led to positive things such as temperance. Temperance is fighting against alcoholism, for example, and they did a great job. Remember the creation of the Salvation Army, for example, l'Armée du Salut, and also passing laws to protect women and children and workers. This is really, really maybe the greatest achievements of the Victorians. That is, even though there were fights between middle class bosses and working class people, nonetheless there were very important laws that were voted in order to protect children. For example, forbidding children to work at night, forbidding children to work more than 12 hours a day, forbidding children from under 10 to go into a mine, also girls, of course, who would go in mines, and they were not even 10 years old, carrying some coal on their back. It was really horrible, and we know that if we read Dickens, for example, in the 1840s, we see how miserable children were at that time. It was a result of the Industrial Revolution, and still things started to change because Parliament and started to vote laws, protectionist laws, for 1 children, 2 women, and 3 for working class people. The reduction of the numbers of hours, protection of the workers in case of accident or disease. We will see that, but it's a very great achievement. At the beginning, as you can see, the comparisons are between 1851 and 1871. Just to show you there is an evolution. The average of a family each family had 6 children. 20 years later, they have 4 children. What does it mean? It means the society becomes industrialized, because at that time it means that people do not need to have too many children to take care of them. The more children, the less industrialized the society is. 42,000 children were registered to be working children, okay, to be working. Only half of them would be working 20 years later. And there would be, although there would be an extension in the number of, an increase in the number of children from 2.5 million in 1851, there will be 3 million children in 1871. So you see, what does it mean? If you look at 21,000 children registered as an employment, I forgot an O, sorry, as an employment, it's a very small proportion of the 3 million children. Where are they? Well, they'll be at school, because in 1871 school is open to children, free schools. And this is one of the great achievements of society, to educate children rather than to make profit out of them by making them work. So this is an interesting chart to remember, not the figures, but to see the positive evolution. We will see also that there were a lot of children because of the death rate among children. Under 6 was nearly 70% in 1851. This is why families had a lot of children, because 70% of them died. So if you had 10 children, 7 would die before the age of 6. You just have 3 children at the end. And of course, parents wanted to have children who would take care of them when they would be old. So that's why so many children were born. Of course, for the upper class and middle class, they had less children because they didn't need that. We will see that there was a demographic boom because of the end of the Hungry 40s and the development of society. And Britain in 1801 had 9 million people, and in 1833 14 million people. So you see there's a really baby boom, I should say, at that time. So to sum up this slide, remember, baby boom, increase of the population, but laws to protect children, and we will see women. Slide 27, trade unions. Trade unions, of course, I mentioned that a few seconds ago. Here is a text about the philosophy and intention. It's a text from 1860, so you will just read it. I'm not going to read it now, but the emphasis is put on free trade, as you see. So working class and trade unionists had the same battle, because you can see that free trade is mentioned in this text. And of course, the idea that the rights are to be protected. The rights of the workers have to be protected. And so you can see a strike in 1888 of the London match girls. That is, little girls, young girls who sold matches to people. because there were smokers in middle class and upper class people, and you don't have a shop really at hand, so you have people outside, young girls particularly, or boys. We can see one boy also, but mainly girls who went on strike because their jobs and their society and their wages were not up to their expectations. So you can see that this is one of the key elements. Even the smallest trade could go on strike because people were conscious that they could do something about it. Of course, laws had to be changed in order for people not to be subjected to punishment because of that. And in 1888, the laws punishing trade unionism and strikes had been abolished. We will see that when we come to laws. Slide 29. Of course, the prosperity that came about after 1846 because of the repealing of the Corn Laws. Trade became free, and so everybody was able to do some commerce, and so it was very good for the commerce. There was one drawback which was not really foreseen, is that because there was no protectionist laws, there will be competition with other countries, and particularly European countries such as France, Germany, and the Netherlands, Scandinavia. Of course, because now the goods could come into Britain without being taxed. There was no protectionist laws, particularly with corn. And one emerging country at the time was becoming more and more industrialized, and it was a big country, were the United States of America. They became very, very competitive. At the beginning, for example, they would buy machines from Britain, and Britain produced a lot of machines. You know that trains were invented in Britain and were exported everywhere in the world, until, of course, the countries started to produce to do their own production. Americans, for example, started to produce their own trains and to make their own harvesting machines, for example. And they could produce a lot because it was a big country, they had a lot of money, and they could produce a lot of corn, for example. So when the repealing of the Corn Laws took place, the Americans sent their corn to Britain in huge tankers, and they flooded the British market with their corn, and cheap corn. So this was positive for the population, of course, because then bread was cheap, the cost of living was cheap. When you are in competition on a product, normally it's the client, the customer, that is going to benefit from this decrease in the price of goods. Of course, the persons who were not happy with that were the landowners, who used to produce corns and who used to be able to fix their price. Now they cannot fix their price anymore because they have to have cheap prices if they want to compete with American and European corn. And so this is how the landed gentry lost little by little its power, because the agricultural system was not competitive enough to match the American market and the American production. On the other hand, British industrialists, bankers, all the middle class people, the tycoons, the bosses, they made profit because they could sell their goods everywhere in the world and buy and trade, and therefore they became wealthy. This is how the middle class became the dominant class in the 19th century. And because they got the right to vote when they were in power with the Liberal Party, they really had all the power. And this is how the capitalist system developed, through the middle class, Protestant, non-conformist, dissenter people. And here, of course, it meant that it enabled the workers to have higher wages, to be allowed to work less hours. As I said, the laws were voted. It was not a problem for the boss because there was prosperity, and therefore they could have a lot of people working. It was not a problem. And of course, if you lost your job, you could find a job very easily. So this was a positive thing. But of course, as I said, with the beginning of international free trade competition, things started to become a little bit difficult, and this is why bosses started to restrict access to jobs and to regular pays and all that. And of course, strikes were still not seen as a positive thing, even though they were not punished anymore, just like they had been before. But the fight that we see in Germinal, for example, took place in England, of course, and this is why the trade unions continued to develop, and the bosses became opponents to the workers. I don't know if you saw also, if you are fans of Netflix, there was a nice series on television, still in the Victorian era, about football players. And what was interesting in that series, of course, is that you could see the bosses used the football as a token of the superiority of the upper class, by opposition to the workers who wanted to dominate them. And so, if you haven't seen the series, I'm not going to spoil the end, but it's a very interesting thing that football was at the center of the class opposition in Great Britain. This class opposition, you see it in the cartoon that you have in my slide 29, still the same one we are working on. That is, you can see the effects of strikes. So this is a conservative cartoon. Obviously, you can see that because you can see that the landowner, more aristocrat boss, is having some wine or cherry in front of a hot fire. He seems to be relaxed. He's got nice clothes, nice house. Everything is fine. And on the other side, you have visibly a working strike worker who is very poor, destitute. His attitude shows he's not relaxed, he's not happy. He hasn't got anything to drink or to eat, and he even has got nothing in his fireplace. He can't even afford to have wood to have a nice fire in his house. So the contrast is to show the effects on the strike upon the capitalist and upon the working man. And it's very negative for the working man, and it's very positive for the capitalist. Of course, we know that strikes are sometimes good for the boss if he wins, or sometimes good for the workers if they win. And so, of course, this is a biased and partisan caricature, trying to convince people that strikes are very bad, and not only they are very bad, but they don't work, because the worker is worse, in a worse situation than before he started to work. The following slide is about friendly societies. I mentioned them. Friendly societies were there to help people, so you can read all about them. You can see the development from in 1801 you had nearly 1 million members of friendly society. In 1872, 4 million. 4 times, an increase of 4 times. And so, as I said, the friendly societies were meant to help socially people who were in difficulties in a trade. But when from time to time trade unions were forbidden, people went into the friendly society, and it was exactly the same. That is, the trade union and the friendly societies had the same people and did the same job. But of course it was undercover, so that the police didn't know and couldn't arrest people. They said, I'm going to my friendly society, I'm not going to my trade union, because at that time trade unions were forbidden. So this is an interesting aspect that you should remember. 1831, there were some laws that that declared, for example, the Combination Acts at the beginning of the 19th century said that trade unions were illegal. It was repealed in 1824, but restricted again in 1825. To show you that the beginning of the 19th century saw this fight between the workers and the middle class. And you can see cartoon showing the Duke of Wellington, who as you remember, was the victor of Napoleon at the Battle of Waterloo, who became a politician. And here, of course, it's a cartoon, it's not reality, but he punches the strikers to show that as member of the government, he is not happy with the strikes that are taking place in his kingdom. In the 1830s, renewed attempts at starting important trade unions. So you know the idea that the greatest number of people united are the people are going to be stronger. But as we can see, there were a lot of dissensions also inside the trades, and therefore people, well, there were failures in the attempts to have big, huge trade unions. Robert Owen is someone you should remember the name of. He created the Grand National Union of 1834, but of course it was it was an example of an attempt to have a big trade union, because it was obvious to people that once again, if you are a great number of workers and you can stop the economy, then you are likely to be successful. But let's remember, it was just the beginning of working class consciousness, so it was a difficult thing, and this is why it never worked, and the government was very often victor of that. Slide 32, we're getting close to the end. As I said, there was this internal strife or internal dissensions that led the great Chartist movement. We mentioned the Chartist movement, one man, one vote, led to its defeat in 1848 and disappeared. So this is one of the negative attempts, but yet it's a negative attempt because it was a failure, but it brought really a sense of fighting working class trade union fight that developed within the working class in Britain. And you can see there are flags with banners, and you can see people demonstrating in the street with the flags. So there is really this sense of identity, a working class identity. And this only emerged because of the Industrial Revolution. Before that, peasants never had that identity, although there were peasants' rebellions, but they were spontaneous. Here, they become really professional trade unionists, and we will see it will lead to the main solution, that is the creation of a political party rather than a trade union, and therefore the creation of the Labour Party. Slide 33, there was the TUC, the Trade Union Congress, in 1868. So you see that the attempts are little by little gaining strength, and little by little unionists are able to unite and become really, really strong. And it enabled them to have the Trade Union Act of 1871, that trade unions became legally recognized, okay, even if it was limited. But it was really, in 1871, officially trade unions were allowed to exist socially, politically, economically, which is a great victory for the working class people, because it took them time, but they managed that. And another great date is another vote. In 1875, you see the years are close. We're getting close to the end of the 19th century. It's the Conspiracy and Protection of Property Act, which was there meant to stop demonstrators to break everything. Some demonstration would turn into riots. There were the Gordon riots before in the 18th century, and this was a trauma for people, for the government, who said, we're not going to give the right to vote to these people. As you can see, they are barbarians, they are savages, they break everything. So the Conspiracy and Protection of Property Act legalized the right to strike and abolished the notion that a social movement is a conspiracy. That is, it's not a conspiracy, it's a social movement, which is, of course, a modern conception of the thing. It's not a conspiracy against the government or against order, but it's something natural and recognizable. Of course, the idea is people should not break anything, or else they would be put into prison, of course. But that's another story. So laws favorable for working class employees. I told you that a lot of laws were passed in favor of workers and also children and women, but all of them are workers anyway, so it's the same. Conspiracy and Protection of Property Act 1871 decriminalizes the trade unions. Employers and Workmen Act 1871 replaced the Master and Servant Act. You can see just the name Master and Servant Act was replaced by Employers and Workmen Act. We're not in the feudal system anymore. We are in a more modern where there are employers and employees. Minors acts, a lot of minor acts. Women and children under 10 are forbidden to work in mines. Then improvement of security in mines. So there are many minor acts in order to protect people there. Factory worker acts, as you can see, there are many, 1864, 67, 78. There are others, of course. Protection of male, female, and children workers. Employers' Liability Act 1880, compensation by the employer when an employee has an accident at work. Because at that time, if you had an accident with a machine, you would just be thrown away and you might be disabled, losing an arm or leg, and you would have no compensation, nothing. Okay, which of course was a terrible thing, which doesn't exist anymore, and we're glad it doesn't. A point in case, that is just an example of many other trades, how things evolved positively in the working class system. So the miners, of course, as you can imagine, were terrible places to be. As you can see on the drawing, you have miners who are smiling and drinking a beer, but you can also see the drawbacks. So, for example, a boy pulling a small cart full of coal and pushed by a man. And these are very shocking things that took place at the beginning of the Victorian era, beginning of the 19th century. Small children, both boys and girls, sometimes as young as 4 years old, were employed in underground hauling trunks full of coal along passages that were too low for adults. So you see, a 4-year-old child, can you imagine 4-year-old to go into a small hole because adults could not go in the small hole? But the parents were not bad parents. They just needed their children to get some money back, because both the mother and the father would be working, but they couldn't have enough money to comfort the whole family and to bring some food to the whole family. So there were legislative rules. There was the Royal Commission report in 1842, which gave all the appalling details, and of course there was also what was shocking for Victorians was the promiscuity between men and women inside mines, or even little young girls and men inside mines. And so, of course, this was not accepted, because you can imagine what can happen in a mine between a young girl and an adult man. Some of them were half naked because it was very hot, and of course this promiscuity was not accepted. And so the report 1842 is really a positive landmark in the improvement of things such as forbidding women to go into mines, and forbidding young girls to go into mines, forbidding young boys under 10 to go into mines, etc., etc. And it's little by little that all those laws were passed. It had an almost immediate effect, which was because, as you can see, there was the Mine Act of 1842. So the Mine Report was sent to Parliament. Of course, it had been ordered by Parliament, who wanted to know what was going on. And as soon as the Mine Report was out, there was the Mines Act. And so you can see what I've already summed up in order to improve the situation in the mines, with some photos to show you that we are lucky to live in our 21st century rather than at that time. And finally, to conclude, I have my last part is about the Labour Party, because then you understand there was a real great improvement within the working class in terms of working class consciousness. People really understood they had a role to play, and of course, if they didn't want to be miserable, they had to fight. But they had to fight on a political basis with rules, and therefore strikes were, for example, something they were allowed to do. Demonstrations also was something they were allowed to do, but it was not enough, of course. It was on a more important level. So trade unions became really an important center of the labor life. But as we saw, it was difficult to have big big trade unions which could have a national influence and could have an influence on the parliament. So the other idea, of course, that came from the Lib Lab members of parliament. Remember the liberal labor members of parliament who were from the working class and had been elected in the Liberal Party. They said, but maybe we are a lot of people. In 1884, they got the right to vote. So if we have the right to vote, all the workers can unite into one party. And it's easy to find a name for that party. It would be either the Working Class Party or, in short, the Labour Party. And this is why the Labour Party emerged towards the end of the 19th century as a very important thing in the mind of workers. And this, one of the key figures is Mr. Keir Hardie that you have in slide number 39. Keir Hardie, he was a miner himself, so he was not a nobleman, he was a miner. He went down the mine, he was a working class man, but he was intelligent. He was able to make money, to save money, to develop his own newspaper, The Miner, in 1887. So he, of course, he used it to promote his own ideas. And he had those political ideas in mind, and so he created, because he was Scottish, the Scottish Labour Party. The Scottish Labour Party became really the first political party just for working class people. It was in Scotland, it was not in England, but it was really the first step that showed that it was possible. The party did not last long for various reasons. Of course, it was the beginning. It was maybe difficult to have such a party. There were probably opposition from other parties who didn't help, or maybe even help to get it down. But Keir Hardie will have, you will hear about Mr. Keir Hardie in the 20th century. He will continue to have an influence on political life. But once again, this Scottish Labour Party that was founded in 1888, I don't know when it stopped, but just a few years later, gave the idea that it was possible to have a Labour Party. And as I said, it's not in my program, but I can mention the date once again. It's in the little blue box at the top of slide 39. And it's the idea that the trade union, the English Labour Party will be officially created in 1906. So, as a conclusion, this is slide number 40, as a conclusion, we see that the emergence of the working class consciousness led to the emergence of this force. It was, of course, obtained thanks to the right to vote. So the franchise, the class on the franchise, as you can see, is very closely linked to economic and social and political developments, as we saw today. And the shape of the political parties in the 20th century and 21st century will be started, I would say, will find their origin in the 19th century with this emergence of a middle class, and which became the main elements of the Whig Party turned into the Liberal Party, and the working class people who will invent a new party which didn't exist before, which will be the Labour Party. So as you can see, the 19th century is really a turning point in, first, the feudal system has disappeared. Now there is a modern political system based on several parties, particularly parties that were important in the 19th century, the Conservative Party, the Liberal Party, and the emerging Labour Party. These three parties will shape the 20th century and 21st century and still continue to shape British life. And of course, the results of the Industrial Revolution with the choices, the economic choices that were made in Britain and later everywhere in the world with a capitalist system and the free trade economy, which of course is showing its limit today, particularly concerning our planet, but which has to be reinvented, is started also at that time. We saw last time that there was a shift also in population from a rural England into a urbanized England, from an agricultural England into a industrialized England. So England became in the 19th century, one of the very first modern industrialized countries in the world. It will soon be followed by many others everywhere in the world, and the process is still continuing. Just to give you an example, we said that in 1851 the majority of the population in England became urbanized and industrialized by opposition to the old system where everybody was lived in the countryside and worked in the agriculture. Well, our planet had the same pattern only in 2011. That is, now today a majority of the human population lives in cities and works in the industry. So the process started in Britain in 1851 and, as you can see, is still continuing today. My last slide is a recap of what we have seen today, and so it's a sort of reminder of what you have to remember. Upper class, middle class, working class, conservative, liberal, then Labour, Tories, Whigs, land, agriculture for the upper class, industry, trade, bank for the middle class, industrial, agricultural workforce for the working class, economic system, protectionism and mercantilism, and then liberalism, and support the Reform Acts, against the Reform Acts, in favor of the Reform Acts, in favor of the Reform Act, and favored church. That's once again, I hope it's clear for you, is an important element for the upper class, Anglican, High Church, Anglo-Catholics or not. These are details. You don't need to go into the details, of course, but just I wanted to be precise. Middle class, non-conformist churches, Calvinists, Protestants, and working class conformist churches or Anglican Low Church, also Calvinists. Okay, the sunken class destitute is what you saw in last week's tutorial with document number 3, if my memory is correct, about Jack London and the people of the abyss. The people of the abyss are called the sunken class, the destitutes. This is in that class that Jack the Ripper would roam and kill people. And of course, this is what you have in the series I mentioned. I'm not doing any publicity for that, but I like it very much because it's very thorough. Frankenstein Chronicles. You can see the sunken people in that series. That's it. I still have 2 minutes, but I won't abuse of them. Just to let you know that this work, this PowerPoint is for you. The charts, this conclusion, for example, you should know by heart this conclusion because it's a good summary, I think, from my standpoint as a professor, is a good summary of what I have tried to tell you and what you should know in order to understand the tutorial that you will have in a few days. And of course, it's a bit complex sometimes because you have things that look like but are not. Sometimes they are opposed, sometimes they change, for example, from the conservative who were protectionists and then accepted liberalism. So it's always a bit difficult if your ideas are not clear. So if anything is not clear after you listen 2 or 3 times to this audio and you look at the PowerPoint 5 or 6 times, I'm only half joking. If everything is not clear after that, please ask questions. These questions are vital because if you don't have the answers, you may be caught up with this during the exam, and you will regret it. And you will say, oh, I should have asked. It would have been better if I had asked. So once again, use your professors during the tutorials. Ask them questions about the lecture or about the tutorial. And if you're a shy person, you can still write to me. Don't worry, I have never bitten any students, and I haven't never been angry at a student. So don't hesitate. You will be welcome with your question, and I'll try to answer it the best I can and the best way. 20 seconds before the end of 2 hours, I'm going to stop here and wish you a good week and a good tutorial for this week. Thank you for your attention, and see you for the last lecture next week on the British Empire.